Questions I think have all been very serious. 1 million Americans died, about 15 million people died worldwide. Where did this come from? What is the evidence for the lab? What is the evidence for it coming from the wet market? So the other thing we've learned recently from their investigation that I led was that in January of 2020, at the very beginning, he was told that the earliest cases did not come from the wet market. He acknowledges it, and he says that the wet market was likely a super spreader. It didn't originate there, it wasn't from the wild animals at the wet market. That was a super spreader event. So he knew this in January of 2020. But you've seen him on the media. For the last 5 years, he continues to say it came from the wet market, it came from the wet market. The wet market's the problem. We need to ban and close the wet market. Why? Now, if he were just a disinterested scientist that didn't have anything to gain, you'd say, well, he's just being honest. That's his opinion. Why condemn him? But what if you also know that he funded the lab that it came from? Would he have a self-interest in protecting himself by arguing it came from nature? So he's not a disinterested observer. He's not an objective person. He's a person who, if it came from the lab, would share responsibility. So he had every reason to hide and cover up. Yeah. And that's why his statements in private are diametrically opposite of his statements in public.
I think that more than just Anthony Fauci, I think that a lot of people knew what was going on. And I tell this story on the Millionaire Morning Show. I had a buddy of mine that caught it in 2019. And this had to be, what, September, October, something like that. And
the notion that he could just say, listen, we were in pursuit of something, we made a mistake, and move forward. I mean, it would seem like, I hate to put it this way, but science is not an exact science. I mean, there's a lot of imperfections that come along with it. You're not just a senator, you're a medical professional. A lot of people don't realize it. They don't notice about you. You're a medical professional. And so when you look at it from a doctor, so when you look at it from that standpoint, it's not perfect. Imperfections come along with this line of work, one could easily argue.
Right.
Why couldn't Fauci just acknowledge that and move on?
I was open yesterday and still am open to an apology and that he wants to modify his point of view. The problem is this didn't start in 2020. It really starts in at least 2010. Mm-hmm. So he funded research in the Netherlands to mutate the avian flu in 2010. This is when the controversy began. I wasn't part of this controversy. I really wasn't even aware of this until 2021. But the controversy raged in the scientific community. A group of scientists led by a scientist at MIT started the Cambridge Working Group, and they criticized the publication of this because they said, if you publish this mutation and how you did it, it'll be a roadmap for bioweapons, and every lunatic out there that has the skills to do this will now have a roadmap as to create biological weapons. So they argued it shouldn't be published and it shouldn't be funded. Well, Anthony Fauci argued in 2010, this is way before the pandemic. This isn't like he made a mistake in the pandemic. He had a philosophic belief that this research was good. So he writes an op-ed in the Washington Post, and in that he says that even if a scientist is bitten, even if a pandemic escapes from a lab, the knowledge is worth the risks. Now that's a philosophic position. I don't think he wants to back away. He could back away from that, but he didn't decide in 2020 to do this. He decided back in 2010. The funding of the lab in Wuhan begins in 2014. It's not a coincidence that his party
because Obama told him he couldn't do it here in the United States.
Because that's when the lab began
know that.
Funded. But he philosophically agrees with this. But this isn't just me speaking. There's a scientist at Stanford by the name of David Relman. He has classified clearance. He's advised the government. He understands this science as well as Anthony Fauci or better. He looked at this experiment that Anthony Fauci funded in the Netherlands on the bird flu to juice up the bird flu, and he said it never should have happened and it never should have been published. So like I say, this debate has raged for 10 years. It was outside the circle of the news like you and I talk about, or even what I was interested in. It was outside the circle until a pandemic occurred. And then some people say, oh, well, it could never happen. It's just crazy. It still could have been nature. Well, this isn't the first time. In 1977, there was a Russian flu. It was an influenza. And they're not positive exactly where it started, but they were able to sequence it. So they looked at the DNA sequence or RNA sequence of this influenza virus from 1977. You know what they discovered? It was identical to a virus in 1954. Well, how could that be possible? Because viruses mutate a little bit every month, and something that originated in 54 would be 20 or 30% different by the time you get to 1977. It was identical. And the conclusion was it had to have gotten out of a lab. And they had vaccines for this virus. There were a handful of labs that had it, and somebody was working with it, and it got infected or infected somebody, or an animal bit somebody and it got out of a lab. It went worldwide. The reason you haven't heard about it, or probably haven't heard about it, is it had no death rate. It was a influenza, and maybe somebody died, but it wasn't like COVID where millions of people died.
Let me tell you something, man. I think that some people theorize that it's a form of population control. I may not necessarily disagree with that,